The world around Ethan Vale existed in muted silence and shadow. Morning light fell through the wide glass walls of his penthouse. But for him, it was only warmth against his skin. Once, those same windows had framed the skyline he helped build. Towers of glass and ambition, each one stamped with his name. Now they were pieces of a world he could no longer see. The doctors had called it a slow eclipse, nerves fading, light dimming, until the last color dissolved into darkness. He had learned to move through that darkness with discipline. His steps were measured, his hands memorized the shapes of furniture, and his mind painted the outlines of what he once knew by heart. Sightless, he had built a new order around sound, the rhythm of footsteps on marble, the hum of distant traffic, the sigh of the elevator cables below. Routine became vision, precision became comfort. But beneath that discipline lay a quiet ache, the weight of memory. He still remembered faces he would never see again, the laughter of boardrooms, the shimmer of city lights, and the deep gray eyes of the woman who now guided him through each day. Her name was Isabel. She had appeared when his world was collapsing. A gentle voice volunteering at the rehabilitation center, reading books to those who could no longer read for themselves. Her presence had been sunlight through storm clouds, soft and certain. She read slowly, her tone rich with warmth, and she had a way of making every word sound like a promise. Over time, she became his constant, his anchor in a world of unchanging night. To others, she was graceful, selfless, a symbol of devotion. To Ethan, she was the bridge between what he had lost and what he still hoped to find. When she spoke, he felt lighter. When she moved across the room, he felt the air shift. Proof that someone still moved for him, still cared. The city saw a story of resilience and love, a blind billionaire and the woman who stayed. Reporters called it inspiring, investors whispered about redemption, and even his household staff looked at her with reverence. She planned charity galas in his name, managed his appointments, and arranged the house with immaculate precision. Yet there were moments, small, easily dismissed, when her perfection carried an edge, a tone of urgency when she reminded him to sign documents, the faint clink of keys that didn't belong to him, the sudden hush of her voice when she thought he was out of range. Ethan, bound by darkness, sensed patterns more than proof. Still, he told himself trust was a choice. He wanted to believe the world had not turned cruel simply because he could no longer see it. Outside, winter approached the city. The glass towers glimmered with cold light. The air smelled of rain and steel. Isabel moved through his home like a melody, her steps soft against marble floors. Each morning she described the sky to him. Always beautiful, always filled with color. He pictured it through her words, imagined the dawn painting gold across the horizon. In those moments, belief was easy. But beneath the surface of her stories, something shifted. A rhythm too controlled, an emotion rehearsed. When she held his hand, he noticed how her pulse barely changed, how comfort came without warmth. She spoke often of hope, of a treatment being developed abroad, of doctors who could restore the miracle of sight. She said she would do anything to help him see again. And he wanted that. Not because he feared blindness, but because he longed to see her face one last time. Every evening she lit scented candles across the penthouse and played the same piece of piano music, slow, haunting, almost devotional. She said it calmed him, but he knew it calmed her more. The melody filled the rooms with fragile peace, while outside the city roared like an ocean. Ethan stood by the window each night, feeling the glass tremble from the wind, imagining the lights beyond. He wondered what truth hid behind her perfect devotion. He could not see the reflection in that glass, the way her eyes avoided his, the way her phone glowed with messages she would never read aloud. He only knew the feeling that something in his life no longer matched its sound. That night, the rain came in sheets against the glass, turning the city's heartbeat into a muffled whisper. Isabel moved quietly through the penthouse, her silhouette passing between the candle flames like a ghost gliding through borrowed light. She paused by his study, glancing toward Ethan's motionless figure near the window. He stood with his hands in his pockets, head tilted slightly upward, as if listening for a truth the world refused to tell. She watched him for a long moment, the man who had once owned everything now reduced to a quiet shape in the dark. His blindness had given her both power and safety. He depended on her entirely, trusted her without hesitation. That trust was a currency more valuable than his millions, and she had learned to spend it carefully. The documents on the desk were ready. Power of attorney papers, sealed and waiting for his signature. Every line written to look like protection, every clause hiding a shadow. Isabel had told herself it wasn't betrayal, it was survival. Her debts were mounting, her past creeping closer with each unanswered call. Ethan's fortune could erase it all, and he would never know until it was too late. Still, sometimes when he smiled, she felt the faintest ache, an echo of conscience, distant but persistent. He spoke so gently, moved so patiently, that for a fleeting moment she would forget her reasons. But then the memory of her old life returned. The hunger, the fear, the promise she once made to herself, never again to be powerless. And so she stayed, beautiful and composed, her lies wrapped in silk and sympathy. Downstairs, the city lights flickered through the storm. Isabel's reflection shimmered in the glass, split by raindrops. For a heartbeat, she couldn't tell if she was looking at herself or at the ghost of the woman she used to be, the girl who once ran barefoot through alleyways, dreaming of safety. That girl had died the day she met Ethan Vale. What stood here now was a creation, polished, controlled, and entirely her own invention. The clock struck midnight. Isabel gathered the papers, checked the pen, and set everything perfectly on the desk. Tomorrow morning, she would guide his hand, tell him it was another routine authorization for charity funds. He would sign, as he always did, and with that signature, her future would change forever. But fate has a strange way of weaving light through deception. At that same moment, Ethan turned from the window, his hand brushing across the nearby table where she had left a small wooden box. He hadn't touched it in months. Inside was the music box she had given him when his sight began to fade. A token of faith, she had said. Tonight, he felt drawn to it again. He wound the handle slowly, and the melody began to play, delicate, trembling, and painfully familiar. The notes echoed through the penthouse, blending with the storm outside. Isabel froze. The sound carried memories she didn't want to face. The day she had bought that box, the man she had met before Ethan, the one who had helped her choose it, and the debt she owed him still. That melody was a reminder that her lies were not buried, only waiting to surface. Ethan smiled faintly as he listened. To him, the song represented trust, the fragile thread that kept his world from unraveling. He believed it was a reminder of hope, the promise of light she often spoke of. He didn't know that the very song he cherished was the key to her undoing. The storm softened into a drizzle. Candlelight flickered over the walls, bending shadows into strange shapes. Isabel turned away from the desk, her pulse quickening as guilt brushed against her like a cold wind. She whispered something under her breath. Not an apology, but a vow to see it through. She had come too far to turn back now. In the silent darkness, Ethan reached for the papers on the desk, tracing the embossed edges with careful fingers. He could sense her presence near him, the faint shift of air as she moved. For a moment, he felt an unspoken tremor. the feeling that something in her heartbeat no longer matched her words. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence between them was filled with things neither could confess. As the last candle burned low, the city began to glow again beneath the clouds. The faint light seeped into the penthouse, touching Ethan's face like a promise, fragile, uncertain, but real. And in that half-lit hour before dawn, something changed. The world felt different, charged with invisible truth. Isabel stood by the window, staring into the blur of lights below, unaware that this was the last night her secrets would stay hidden. Somewhere beyond the storm, a new day waited, a day that would test the meaning of love, trust, and the fine line between salvation and deceit. The promise of light had begun to stir. Morning arrived quietly, as if the city itself were exhausted from the night's storm. The skyline gleamed beneath thin clouds, and the penthouse was filled with a pale, forgiving light. For Ethan Vale, morning had always been a ritual of sound. The rustle of newspapers, the faint hiss of the coffee machine, the whisper of Isabel's steps moving across polished floors. Every sound painted his unseen world in rhythm and familiarity. Today those rhythms felt slightly different. The air seemed heavy with the scent of rain and something unspoken. Isabel's movements were slower, precise to the point of strain. She kept glancing at her phone, though Ethan could not see it. Her breath tightened each time a notification hummed against the marble counter. On the breakfast table, beside a vase of white lilies, lay an envelope delivered by hand. No return address, no corporate seal, just his name written in black ink. Ethan's assistant had left it earlier, assuming it was another note of sympathy or a business invitation. Isabel noticed it first. She reached for it, fingers trembling before she caught herself and steadied her hand. The handwriting was familiar. She felt her stomach tighten as if the air had thinned. That looping, deliberate script belonged to someone she had tried to forget, a man whose memory carried the taste of danger and debt. Her pulse quickened. The past she had buried beneath elegance and obedience was now whispering from the surface of the paper. She slipped the envelope under a stack of documents before Ethan could reach for it. He heard the faint shuffle and asked what it was, but Isabel's answer was effortless, shaped by habit and calm. Still, the lie lingered in the air, invisible yet heavy. After breakfast, she retreated to the office, closing the door behind her. The envelope lay on the desk like a small, breathing secret. For a long moment, she simply stared at it. Outside, sunlight danced across glass towers, and she could almost convince herself it was just another message, harmless, irrelevant. Yet she knew better. The handwriting alone was enough to tear through the delicate fabric of her new life. With a slow breath, she opened it. Inside was a single page, written in the same precise hand. You promised you would come back for what you took. Time's almost up. He deserves to know the truth. No signature, no address. Just those words, the past condensed into threat. Isabel felt the blood drain from her face. The note smelled faintly of tobacco, the same scent that haunted the cheap motel rooms of her former life. Whoever had written it hadn't forgotten. She folded the letter quickly, tucking it deep inside her pocket. The paper crinkled against her heartbeat. For the rest of the morning, she moved through the penthouse like a figure in a dream, serving coffee, arranging papers, answering calls, but each motion carried a tremor she could not hide. Ethan noticed the difference not with his eyes, but with his other senses. He heard the tiny pauses between her words, the slight uneven rhythm of her steps. To him, it felt like the weather before a storm. When he reached for the documents she had prepared earlier, she guided his hand gently, yet the warmth that usually softened her touch was gone. Beneath her calm, he could sense a wall being built. The day stretched long and silent. Outside, the clouds drifted and the city resumed its restless motion. Inside, Isabel's mind was an echo chamber of memory. The letter, the voice behind it, the debt that had driven her to Ethan Vale in the first place. She had believed she could outrun her past simply by reinventing herself in someone else's story. But the past had a way of learning new routes, of finding the right door to knock on. As afternoon light poured across the floor, she watched Ethan from a distance. He was listening to an audiobook, head tilted, expression peaceful. His blindness had taught him stillness, something she had never mastered. For the first time, she envied him. He could not see the shadow crawling back toward them, but she could feel it clearly, pressing against the glass walls of their high-rise sanctuary. She thought of destroying the letter, burning it to ash and silence. Yet part of her couldn't. It was proof that she had once been more than the woman everyone saw now, proof that her lies had roots and reasons. The paper became a pulse in her pocket, reminding her that the story she had built on compassion and care was only a disguise. By evening, the tension had deepened into something visible. The staff moved quietly, sensing that their usually serene household had changed tone. Ethan, unaware of the cause, tried to focus on his evening routine, but even the music that filled the penthouse sounded different, its familiar melody carrying an undercurrent of unease. Isabel stood by the balcony, watching the city lights ignite one by one. To anyone else, it would have looked like peace. Yet behind her eyes, old memories were rising. The face of the man who had once promised to make her rich if she played her role well enough. The arguments, the fear, the final night she had run away carrying something she should have left behind. Now he, or someone working for him, had found her again. And in that realization, the empire she had built with lies began to tremble, stone by stone. The night carried a strange quiet into the penthouse. No storm this time, only stillness, heavy and alert, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Isabel sat by the window, her reflection merging with the darkness outside. Below, the lights of passing cars streaked like ribbons of fire across wet asphalt. Each one felt like a memory rushing past too fast to catch. She hadn't eaten. She hadn't spoken much either. Every thought returned to the letter folded inside the drawer, its words repeating like a distant echo she could not silence. He deserves to know the truth. The sentence cut deeper the more she tried to forget it. Ethan moved quietly through the apartment, guided by instinct and the memory of space. Though he couldn't see her, he sensed her distance, felt the absence of her warmth in the air between them. His world was made of tones and patterns, and Isabel's voice, usually steady and tender, now carried edges. When she answered him, the softness that once wrapped each word had thinned. In the silence that followed, Ethan reached for the piano. He had begun playing again in the months after his blindness, the notes a language that didn't need sight to speak. His fingers moved with uncertain grace across the keys, filling the room with a melody both gentle and haunting. Isabel turned at the sound, startled. The song reminded her of something long buried. A night from her old life, the same tune played in a smoky bar where she'd first met the man whose letter now threatened to destroy her future. The melody was different now, slower, purer. Ethan played it with sincerity, unaware of its ghostly connection. Each note pressed against Isabel's composure, loosening it further. She closed her eyes, trying to breathe through the weight of guilt building in her chest. When the music ended, Ethan smiled faintly. "It feels like hope," he murmured to himself. And though Isabel said nothing, she knew hope was the one thing slipping further away. Later, when he went to rest, she walked through the penthouse like a sleepwalker tracing invisible lines. Every corner of that home was a monument to his trust, a trust she had used to shield her lies. The scent of his cologne lingered faintly near the door, and for a brief moment, she wondered what it would feel like to be honest, to tell him everything, to admit who she truly was. But the memory of that voice, the man who had written the letter, rose again like smoke from a smoldering fire. His threats had been real once, and she knew what he was capable of. If she confessed, the past would not forgive her. It would come for her and for Ethan, too. She opened the drawer, pulled out the letter again, and read it under the warm glow of a single lamp. The ink seemed darker now, more alive. The message was both promise and warning. She folded it once more, tighter this time, and slid it into her coat pocket. Her decision was forming, not from courage, but necessity. If the past wanted to reach her, it would have to go through the man she had learned to control. Ethan stirred in his sleep as she passed his door. His breathing was slow and even. In the dim light, he looked peaceful, untouched by the shadows that circled his world. For a heartbeat, something inside her softened. She had not expected him to be kind when she first arrived in his life. She had expected control, arrogance, a man hardened by wealth. But Ethan Vale was different. His blindness had stripped him of cruelty. He was gentle in a way that made her lies feel crueler by contrast. She lingered there longer than she meant to, then turned away. The elevator's soft chime followed her as she descended to the lobby, the city waiting beyond the glass doors. Cold air met her like truth, sharp, unavoidable. She walked into the night, heels echoing against pavement, until she reached the corner where the streetlight flickered over a waiting figure. He stepped forward just enough for her to recognize the shape of his coat, the glint of a familiar ring. The man from her past. He didn't speak, not yet. The silence between them said enough. She handed him a small envelope. Money. Not nearly enough to silence him forever, but enough to delay the storm. His smirk was the same as it had always been. Thin. Knowing. Cruel. He took the envelope and vanished into the dark without another word. Isabel stood there for a long moment, breathing the cold, trembling under the weight of what she had just done. For now, she had bought time. But time was never free. Back in the penthouse, Ethan awoke suddenly, his pulse quickened by a sound he couldn't place. The distant hum of the elevator, the faint scent of rain brought in from outside, it all painted a feeling he couldn't explain. Something was changing. The air felt heavier, the silence thicker. He reached out, touching the side of his bed, then the nightstand. His hand brushed against the corner of the music box. The same melody he'd played earlier still lingered in his memory, looping softly through the dark. For a moment, he thought he heard another sound, the soft click of a door closing far away. He whispered her name once, uncertainly. No answer came. And somewhere far below, in the city that glittered like broken glass, Isabel walked beneath the streetlights, clutching her coat tighter, unaware that her small act of desperation had already set the next chain of events in motion, one that would turn her secret into revelation. The stranger's letter had done its work. The story was now awake. Morning returned with silence thick enough to feel. Ethan woke to the familiar weight of blindness, but something about the day felt uneven, as if the rhythm that governed his life had slipped half a beat. The air held a different scent, faintly metallic, almost like rain against steel. Somewhere nearby, a drawer was slightly open. He could sense it through the soft hiss of air that moved differently in the room. He moved through his penthouse with his usual care, his cane barely touching the marble floor. Each sound gave him information, his world built not by light, but by vibration and echo. Today, those echoes felt distorted. A picture frame had been moved. A chair's leg brushed against the edge of the carpet instead of resting squarely. The smallest things, invisible to most, shouted their difference in his darkness. From the kitchen came the faint scent of coffee, but the blend was wrong. Isabel always brewed a light roast. This one was heavier, bitterer. She had changed something, intentionally or not. Ethan said nothing, but his mind began to map these changes one by one. For years, blindness had been his prison. Now it was becoming his strength. Deprived of sight, He noticed things the seeing never would, the subtleties of silence, the hesitation in footsteps, the way guilt had its own kind of sound. Isabel entered the room quietly, her perfume preceding her by a moment. Usually that fragrance, delicate jasmine, announced comfort. But this morning, it lingered with nervous weight. She moved differently, faster, more deliberate. To someone with eyes, she might have looked perfectly composed. To Ethan, her composure was a tremor. He asked for his morning schedule, and she recited it smoothly. Too smoothly. Her voice carried precision, but no ease. It was the tone of someone holding a mask. Ethan nodded, listening not to her words but to the spaces between them, the brief hesitations, the shallow breaths, the way she inhaled before mentioning certain names. When she left the room, he followed the trail of her perfume to the study. On the desk, papers waited for his review. He traced their edges with steady fingers, each page crisp and uncreased, except one. The top corner of a single sheet was bent, as if it had been hidden, folded, then flattened again. His thumb found the faint ridge of where it had once been folded in thirds, like a letter. He did not unfold it. Instead, he placed it back exactly as he had found it and stepped away. Trust, once unquestioned, now felt fragile in his hands. Outside, the day unfolded in color he could not see. Winter sun flashing against towers, the city alive with motion. Inside, Ethan's penthouse felt colder than usual. Isabel's presence filled the space with movement, but not warmth. She had always been the voice of order, the keeper of calm. Lately, she had become a stranger made of routine. That afternoon, while she was on a call in the next room, Ethan sat in his armchair near the piano. Her voice drifted through the half-open door, low, sharp, urgent. He could not make out the words, but he recognized tone, negotiation, not conversation. When she noticed him near, her voice softened instantly, her words turning to pleasant murmurs. He smiled faintly to himself. He had been a businessman once. He knew what truth sounded like, and what it sounded like when it was being rewritten. Later, the housekeeper came in to tidy the living room. Ethan greeted her, and she hesitated slightly, her tone uncertain, as if she wasn't sure how much to say. She mentioned a visitor who had dropped off something for Isabel earlier, an envelope she had placed on the console by the door. Isabel had told her it was personal correspondence, not to be touched. The information was casual, but it sank into Ethan like a seed. He waited until evening to ask Isabel about it. She explained it away easily, as she always did, her tone filled with gentle certainty. Yet, her voice betrayed a slight tremor when he mentioned the word envelope. After she left the room, Ethan turned toward the window. He stood there, motionless, hands resting against the glass. Somewhere below, the city's pulse continued. Cars, footsteps, sirens, 1,000 sounds blending into one steady heartbeat. He listened, not to the city, but to himself. The darkness around him no longer felt empty. It felt alive, whispering. Each whisper was a memory, each pause a possibility. He remembered his doctor once telling him that when the eyes fail, the brain begins to see through other senses. Perhaps that was true, he thought. Perhaps blindness didn't mean absence, it meant seeing differently. He began to realize that the darkness could reveal more than light ever did. Evening came quietly, as if afraid to enter the penthouse. The air held that stillness which arrives before something breaks. Ethan sat near the piano again, fingertips resting lightly on the keys but not pressing them. The faint hum of the city rose through the glass like distant thunder. In the hush between those sounds, he could hear her breathing across the room, steady, measured, rehearsed. Isabel was pretending to read. Each turn of a page was too deliberate, the sound too sharp. She was performing normality, not living it. Ethan had learned to measure honesty through rhythm. Her rhythm had lost its pulse. When she rose to pour wine, the clink of glass met the uneven tremor of her hand. He memorized it. Everything she tried to hide had texture now. Small, precise vibrations that painted her lies clearer than any image. He wondered what it meant to trust someone when sight was gone. In darkness, belief became a kind of blindness too, a choice rather than an instinct. He had once thought blindness was the end of perception, but now he understood it as a magnifier. The absence of vision made every false note ring louder. As night deepened, Isabel moved to the terrace. Her outline was a blur against the city's glow, though he could not see it. He felt her there, the change in temperature when the door opened, the faint hiss of wind curling through. Her thoughts seemed to stretch far beyond the horizon, restless and uneasy. Inside, Ethan replayed the day in silence. The scent of bitter coffee, the envelope that had appeared and vanished, the sound of her secret calls. Each detail aligned like coordinates, forming a map he could almost read. Something existed just beyond understanding, a pattern that connected every small disturbance. When she returned, her voice was softer, but her presence felt thinner, as if a piece of her had stayed out there in the cold. She touched his shoulder briefly. The gesture should have been comfort, yet it felt like apology. Later, when she disappeared into her study, Ethan began to explore the room by memory. His hands brushed over surfaces, tracing objects he thought he knew. A photograph frame was missing. Its absence left a small square of untouched dust on the table. He turned his head slightly, listening. From behind the closed door of her study came the muted rustle of paper and the faint scrape of metal, perhaps a drawer locking. He stood there for a long time, motionless, listening to every heartbeat in the apartment. Somewhere within that silence, he began to understand. The truth was already speaking, just not in words. He returned to the piano and began to play, not the song she had taught him, but an older one that belonged entirely to him. The melody unfolded slowly, deliberate and searching. It filled the rooms with quiet power, and the vibrations carried through the floor into the study where Isabel sat frozen, the locked drawer still open before her. The letter lay inside, its ink now creased from her trembling fingers. Each note he played seemed to call to her conscience, stripping away the layers she had built. The sound moved like light in darkness, touching corners she had kept hidden. She wanted to shut the door, to block it out, but she couldn't. The music pressed against her like truth itself. When it ended, silence fell like snowfall, soft, absolute. Ethan closed the piano lid gently and exhaled. The darkness around him felt alive again, but no longer empty. He understood now that blindness wasn't his weakness, it was his witness. It had been watching, quietly gathering the pieces she thought invisible. Across the apartment, Isabel leaned against the wall, breath shallow. She could feel that he knew, maybe not everything, but enough to make the ground beneath her shift. In that fragile pause between exposure and confession, their lives balanced on a thread. Outside, the city pulsed with light, unaware of the quiet war beginning above its skyline. And in the depths of that high glass tower, Ethan Vale began to listen not just to sound, but to silence itself. Because within that silence, the truth was waiting to be heard. The next morning arrived with a sky the city could barely see, washed pale, veiled in mist. Ethan sat by the window, the light warming his face, though he could not perceive it. The world outside moved in color, but his world moved in sound. From somewhere below, the whistle of a vendor's cart drifted up through the glass. A car door slammed. Footsteps crossed the marble behind him. Isabel. He recognized her step instantly, the soft double tap of her heels, the brief pause before she spoke. Sleep well? She asked. Her voice was bright, too bright. It rang like glass under tension. Ethan smiled faintly. I slept, he said. Dreamt of music I didn't remember writing. She laughed, light and hollow. That's a good dream to have. But he could hear the lie beneath it. The way her tone collapsed at the edges. The way laughter ended too quickly. After breakfast, Isabel left for her usual errands. Her perfume lingered after she was gone, fading into the air like a ghost reluctant to leave. The moment the elevator closed, Ethan turned toward the piano. He had written music long before he'd lost his sight. Each melody was a map of emotion, a trace of moments he couldn't describe any other way. But now, as his fingers found the keys, the tune that came was not his own. It was the same song Isabel had asked him to play weeks ago, a melody she claimed reminded her of home. He stopped mid-note. That melody, it wasn't hers. It wasn't from her childhood. He remembered hearing it once before, years ago when a lawyer visited him to discuss his late father's estate. The same tune had been playing faintly in the background of the recording room where they met. A corporate jingle, a theme connected to one of his family's companies. The realization struck him cold. Isabel had never known his father. She could not have known that tune unless someone had told her. He stood abruptly, the piano bench scraping the floor. His hand brushed over the instrument's surface until he found the corner where a thin sheet of paper stuck out. It was a music sheet, folded once, with faint pencil marks along the margins. He could feel the indentation of writing pressed too hard into the page. Using his fingertips, he traced the marks like braille. There. Letters, names, notes of something not musical, but personal. He couldn't read it by touch alone, but he could sense what it was. Not sheet music, but a message disguised within it. He placed it back, careful not to disturb it. By noon, the housekeeper returned. Ethan asked her gently about the envelope from yesterday. She hesitated, afraid, then whispered, I saw her tear it and burn the pieces. Ethan nodded slowly. Thank you. That's all I needed. He didn't need sight to know what burning meant. It was fear turned into smoke. That evening, Isabel came home humming that same melody again. The same jingle, the same memory. And for the first time, Ethan didn't interrupt her. He let her finish the song, her voice soft and fragile. Then, he asked quietly, Where did you learn that tune? She froze for a moment. He could feel it in the air. The hesitation, the panic. From you, she said finally. You played it last month. He nodded as if satisfied, but his heart told him otherwise. That night he stayed awake long after she had gone to bed. The city's hum pressed gently through the glass, steady and unending. In that rhythm, he heard something new, something his blindness had hidden until now. The truth was not in what she said. It was in what she repeated. The lies she told had begun to echo. And echoes, he knew, always came from somewhere real. He leaned back in his chair, whispering to himself, The truth is playing in her song. I just need to hear the rest of it. Midnight arrived wrapped in rain. It came softly at first, whispering against the glass like hesitant confession. The city lights blurred into streaks of white and orange, diffused through the storm. Ethan sat near the piano again, listening to the rhythm of raindrops as if they were messages. Each one seemed to speak a single syllable of truth he was still trying to understand. He had lived many years in darkness, but never like this. Not the blindness of eyes, but of trust. That kind of darkness was heavier, colder, more deliberate. Across the room, Isabel slept, or pretended to. Her breathing was steady, but her heart wasn't in the same rhythm. He could tell. She had grown skilled at performing peace, but tonight, her act trembled. He waited until her breath settled deeper, then rose quietly. His hand found the piano again. Beneath the lid, he traced the edge of the folded sheet, the one with the pencil marks. He hesitated only a moment before sliding it free. The paper was faintly rough where the pencil had pressed. He carried it to his desk, where a small device waited, an embossed text reader designed for the blind. It scanned marks and read them aloud in a calm, mechanical voice. The device hummed softly, and then words began to emerge through its monotone tone. Transfer, accounts, confirmation pending, signature required, Isabel. He stopped it immediately. The air left his lungs in silence. It wasn't music, it was evidence. The melody she made him play had hidden her trail. She had turned music into camouflage. He folded the page carefully, his hands trembling. The realization was not only betrayal, it was brilliance twisted into cruelty. She had used his blindness as a shield, disguising her actions as affection. But now, the sound of deception had a melody, and he could hear it. In the stillness of that moment, another sound rose, the faint shuffle of feet. Isabel was standing at the doorway, watching him. Her voice broke the silence, soft but sharp. Couldn't sleep? Ethan turned toward her, his face calm. No, I was listening to the rain. She stepped closer, her bare feet soundless on the rug. The scent of her perfume, once comforting, now smelled like distance. She touched the folded page on the desk, her hand brushing his. What's this? She asked lightly. A song, he said. One I didn't know I'd written. Her hand froze. Just a fraction of a second, but enough. He smiled faintly. It's strange, isn't it? How music can hide so much. She swallowed hard, the sound sharp in the dark. You're tired, Ethan. You should rest. He didn't answer. He simply tilted his head, listening to her words as if they were notes. Her calm tone was rehearsed, her movements careful, measured. Fear had its rhythm, and he could hear it clearly now. As she turned to leave, he spoke quietly, almost kindly. Tomorrow, I'll play that song for you again. Her steps faltered for half a second, then continued toward the bedroom. When she was gone, Ethan remained where he stood, his hand resting on the folded paper. The device's mechanical voice still echoed faintly in his mind. Transfer. Accounts. Isabel. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline like a low warning. Ethan realized then that this was no longer about betrayal alone. It was about survival, about reclaiming control in a world that assumed his blindness meant weakness. He pressed the paper flat against the desk, feeling the faint ridges under his fingertips, the invisible texture of deception. And for the first time, he smiled, not with anger, but with clarity. Because now, he knew her secret had a sound, and he was going to make her hear it too. The morning sun broke through the city haze like revelation, sharp, white, unforgiving. Ethan didn't see it, but he felt its warmth against his face, the faint hum of the city growing louder below his windows. Every sound was alive. The elevator bell, the shuffle of the housekeeper's shoes, the clink of Isabel's cup as she stirred her coffee. She was trying too hard to be calm. Ethan sat across from her, motionless except for the rhythmic motion of his fingers against the table. 3 slow taps, 1 pause, 2 quick ones. A pattern he used when thinking. You're quiet this morning, Isabel said, smiling. He turned his face toward her voice. Just listening, he replied. To what? To the truth, trying to make itself heard. She froze for half a heartbeat, then recovered with a soft laugh. You always sound like a poet. He smiled faintly. Only when I'm blind enough to see. The conversation drifted to small things. The day's meetings, the new renovations at the charity foundation, her plans to meet a friend for lunch. But behind her polished tone, Ethan could hear the cracks forming. The same cracks he had heard in her song, in the shuffle of that letter, in the voice that trembled when she said trust. When she left later that morning, her heels clicked faster than usual on the marble floor. As soon as the door shut, Ethan reached for his phone and called someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Lena Ward, his former assistant before Isabel arrived. Lena had been his eyes once, back when trust still meant safety. "Ethan?" Her voice carried that old firmness, a tone built on loyalty and restraint. "I need your help," he said quietly. "Something's wrong. I need you to find what was burned." There was a pause. "A letter?" she asked. "Yes, from someone named Crawford. He handled my father's personal holdings. Isabel destroyed it." Lena exhaled sharply. "I'll find it. But Ethan, if she's involved, this won't be small." "I know," he said. "That's why I need the truth before she realizes I'm already hearing it." He ended the call, leaned back, and listened to the empty apartment. It was astonishing how sound could carry emotion. Silence could be guilt. The faint hum of the air vents could feel like deceit. Hours later, while Isabel was still away, Ethan's phone buzzed again. Lena's voice came through in a whisper. "I found a digital copy of the letter. It was scanned before delivery." Ethan's breath caught. "Read it." Lena's tone hardened. "It says your father's private fund, his inheritance trust, was being transferred to your legal spouse if you didn't claim it within a year. Isabel filed documents in your name last month. Ethan. She's listed as your fiancée." For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. The city outside seemed to fade into a hollow hum. "She knew," he whispered finally. "She knew exactly what she was doing." Lena hesitated. "Should I alert the firm?" "No," Ethan said softly. "Not yet. Let her think I'm still in the dark." He ended the call, his pulse steady but cold. The truth now had form, money, motive, and betrayal bound together in ink and signatures. Isabel had wrapped her love in the language of ownership. He sat there in silence, letting the weight of it settle. And yet, beneath the shock, there was something else rising within him. Resolve. He had lived without sight long enough to know that light wasn't always gentle. Sometimes it burned, and he was ready to burn for the truth. The rain had stopped, leaving the city glistening under the evening lights. From the window, the wind carried the scent of wet asphalt and faraway lilacs from the park below. Inside the penthouse, the air was heavy, thick with the silence that falls before confession. Ethan sat near the piano again, running his fingers lightly over the keys. He wasn't playing, just feeling the familiar texture of sound waiting to happen. It calmed him, gave him control over the invisible world around him. He heard the soft chime of the elevator, then footsteps. Isabel's. He didn't turn. She entered the room, her voice bright, too cheerful. "You've been quiet all day. Are you still writing that new melody?" He smiled faintly, his face unreadable. "In a way." She set down her bag. "What's it called?" He turned his head slightly, his blank gaze meeting her presence. "The Letter That Could See." For the first time in days, she hesitated. He heard it, the pause before breath, the slight catch in her throat. "That's an interesting title," she said carefully. "What inspired it?" "Something I found," he said softly. "Something that survived the fire." The room seemed to shrink around them. Isabel didn't move. He could feel her fear thickening the air, the way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, trying to appear calm. "What do you mean?" she asked. He rose slowly from the bench. His hand brushed the piano lid closed with a soft click that sounded louder than thunder. "You told me that letter was nothing," he said quietly. but it spoke more truth than you ever have. Ethan, I don't lie, he interrupted gently. You're not very good at it anymore. Her breath quickened. You're misunderstanding. He shook his head. I used to think blindness meant not seeing what's in front of you. Now I know it means seeing what others hide. She stepped closer, voice trembling. I was protecting you. From what? He asked. The truth or the guilt? She didn't answer. The silence stretched long, cold, absolute. Outside, the city's heartbeat throbbed faintly through the glass. Finally, she spoke, her tone fragile. I did it for us. Your father left everything locked away. Money, power, everything you could have built with me. I just opened the door before it closed forever. Ethan's jaw tightened. And you forged my name to do it. Her tears came fast, hot, desperate. You wouldn't have believed me. You never do. He turned slightly, his voice calm but steady. You're right. I don't believe you. Not anymore. She moved toward him as if to touch him, but he stepped back, just enough that her hand met empty air. He whispered, Do you know what I've learned, Isabel? A blind man can't see lies, but he can hear when someone's heart changes its rhythm. Her sob broke in half. Ethan, please. But he didn't respond. He simply walked past her, toward the balcony doors, letting the sound of the city replace her voice. Behind him, Isabel's quiet crying filled the silence, but even that felt staged, hollow. He stood there, facing the night he couldn't see, and let the truth breathe around him. For so long he had depended on her eyes to describe the world. Now he realized he never needed them. The world had always been speaking. It just required silence to hear it. He spoke softly, not to her, but to the air. You thought I was blind, but the letter saw for me. The reflection of city lights shimmered across the floor, unseen, but felt. In that moment, Ethan Vale understood. Blindness had not taken his vision. It had given him something far more powerful, clarity. And clarity, once found, never forgave deception. The following days unfolded like a quiet storm. Nothing loud, nothing visible. But beneath the calm surface of Ethan's life, something irreversible had begun. He stopped asking Isabel for help. No requests for directions across the room, no questions about mail or meetings. Each time she tried to offer, he simply said, I've got it. And somehow he did. He learned to count his steps from every wall, to trace the patterns of light through warmth, to hear distance through the echo of sound. In the silence, he was rebuilding something. Independence. Isabel noticed. Her tone changed. Her laughter grew thinner. She filled the air with noise, music, news, conversation, as if afraid of what silence might reveal. One afternoon, Ethan asked her to schedule a meeting with his lawyer, Mr. Dane. Her voice wavered slightly. Why? Everything's already settled. Exactly, he said. I just want to hear it again. The meeting was set for the next day. Isabel insisted on being there, her smile strained but unbreakable. She didn't realize that Ethan had already arranged something else. Lena Ward, his former assistant, would be present too, disguised as a transcriptionist for the blind. The room smelled faintly of oak and ink. Ethan could tell where everyone sat by the sound of their breath and the scrape of their chairs. Isabel's perfume floated directly across from him, sugar-sweet and nervous. Mr. Dane began reading through documents, asset transfers, account verifications. When he reached the clause that named Isabel as co-beneficiary, Ethan stopped him gently. Could you read that again, please? Isabel shifted. Ethan, we've gone through this. He lifted a hand. I wasn't asking you. The lawyer repeated it slowly. Isabel's breathing grew shallow. She tried to interject again, but Ethan's voice cut through her words like a calm blade. "Strange," he said softly, "because I don't recall signing anything recently." The lawyer hesitated. "These documents were received electronically, Mr. Vale." "Under whose authorization?" There was a long pause. Paper rustled. "Your assistants," Mr. Dane said finally. "Ms. Isabel Hart." Lena's fingers stilled on the keyboard. Isabel's composure cracked. "Ethan, it was temporary, just for—" "Your safety," he finished. "Or your security?" Silence. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his blank eyes steady, focused not on her face, but on the sound of her guilt filling the air. "I trusted you to see the world for me," he said quietly, "and you used my darkness to build your own light." Isabel's voice trembled. "You don't understand. I was doing it for us. I thought—" He stood up, his presence commanding, though his voice never rose. "No, Isabel. You thought I'd never find out. That blindness meant ignorance. But you were wrong. The dark doesn't hide truth. It exposes it." She covered her mouth, eyes wide with panic. Mr. Dane looked away, uncomfortable. Ethan turned slightly toward Lena. "Make sure the documents are returned to my control, immediately." Lena's typing began again, brisk, final. Isabel's whisper cracked. "Ethan, please, don't do this. We can fix it." He tilted his head toward her voice, his expression unreadable. "You can't fix something you broke with your own hands." He walked toward the door, guided by memory, not sight. Before leaving, he paused and said softly, "I may be blind, Isabel, but I can still see when someone's light is false." Then he stepped into the hallway, the sound of his cane tapping faintly, steady, unhurried, certain. Behind him, the silence left in that room was heavier than any sound could be. For the first time since losing his sight, Ethan Vale was walking not through darkness, but toward it, as if it finally belonged to him. The corridors outside the law office stretched quiet and long, filled with the muffled hum of the city below. Ethan's cane tapped against the floor in slow, deliberate rhythm. Every sound was his compass now, steady, confident, alive. He wasn't walking away in defeat. He was walking through the fire that had once blinded him. When the elevator doors closed behind him, he finally exhaled. The sound echoed softly off the mirrored walls, his reflection invisible to him, but clear in his mind. A man no longer shaped by what he'd lost, but by what he had found. Freedom. Outside, the city glowed under a heavy gray sky. The air smelled of rain and steel. Ethan turned his face toward it and smiled faintly, as if greeting an old friend. He called Lena from the car. "Everything's in motion," she said. "The accounts are frozen under your name. Isabel can't touch anything." "Good," Ethan said quietly. "Make sure the firm knows I'll handle the transition personally." Lena hesitated. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" "I've been ready since the day she thought I couldn't see her." The car moved through the city, tires hissing on wet streets. Every sound, the wipers, the passing traffic, the heartbeat of the rain, felt sharper, clearer. The world had never looked brighter to him. But beneath the calm surface of Ethan's life, something irreversible had begun. He stopped asking Isabel for help. No requests for directions across the room, no questions about mail or meetings. Each time she tried to offer, he simply said, "I've got it." And somehow he did. He learned to count his steps from every wall, to trace the patterns of light through warmth, to hear distance through the echo of sound. In the silence, he was rebuilding something. Independence. Isabel noticed. Her tone changed. Her laughter grew thinner. She filled the air with noise, music, news, conversation, as if afraid of what silence might reveal. One afternoon, Ethan asked her to schedule a meeting with his lawyer, Mr. Dane. Her voice wavered slightly. Why? Everything's already settled. Exactly, he said. I just want to hear it again. The meeting was set for the next day. Isabel insisted on being there, her smile strained but unbreakable. She didn't realize that Ethan had already arranged something else. Lena Ward, his former assistant, would be present too, disguised as a transcriptionist for the blind. The room smelled faintly of oak and ink. Ethan could tell where everyone sat by the sound of their breath and the scrape of their chairs. Isabel's perfume floated directly across from him, sugar-sweet and nervous. Mr. Dane began reading through documents, asset transfers, account verifications. When he reached the clause that named Isabel as co-beneficiary, Ethan stopped him gently. Could you read that again, please? Isabel shifted. Ethan, we've gone through this. He lifted a hand. I wasn't asking you. The lawyer repeated it slowly. Isabel's breathing grew shallow. She tried to interject again, but Ethan's voice cut through her words like a calm blade. Strange, he said softly, because I don't recall signing anything recently. The lawyer hesitated. These documents were received electronically, Mr. Vale. Under whose authorization? There was a long pause. Paper rustled. Your assistants, Mr. Dane said finally. Ms. Isabel Hart. Lena's fingers stilled on the keyboard. Isabel's composure cracked. Ethan, it was temporary, just for... Your safety, he finished. Or your security? Silence. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his blank eyes steady, focused not on her face, but on the sound of her guilt filling the air. I trusted you to see the world for me, he said quietly, and you used my darkness to build your own light. Isabel's voice trembled. You don't understand. I was doing it for us. I thought... He stood up, his presence commanding, though his voice never rose. No, Isabel. You thought I'd never find out. That blindness meant ignorance. But you were wrong. The dark doesn't hide truth. It exposes it. She covered her mouth, eyes wide with panic. Mr. Dane looked away, uncomfortable. Ethan turned slightly toward Lena. Make sure the documents are returned to my control, immediately. Lena's typing began again, brisk, final. Isabel's whisper cracked. Ethan, please, don't do this. We can fix it. He tilted his head toward her voice, his expression unreadable. You can't fix something you broke with your own hands. He walked toward the door, guided by memory, not sight. Before leaving, he paused and said softly, I may be blind, Isabel, but I can still see when someone's light is false. Then he stepped into the hallway, the sound of his cane tapping faintly, steady, unhurried, certain. Behind him, the silence left in that room was heavier than any sound could be. For the first time since losing his sight, Ethan Vale was walking not through darkness, but toward it, as if it finally belonged to him. The corridors outside the law office stretched quiet and long, filled with the muffled hum of the city below. Ethan's cane tapped against the floor in slow, deliberate rhythm. Every sound was his compass now, steady, confident, alive. He wasn't walking away in defeat. He was walking through the fire that had once blinded him. When the elevator doors closed behind him, he finally exhaled. The sound echoed softly off the mirrored walls, his reflection invisible to him, but clear in his mind. A man no longer shaped by what he'd lost, but by what he had found. Freedom. Outside, the city glowed under a heavy gray sky. The air smelled of rain and steel. Ethan turned his face toward it and smiled faintly, as if greeting an old friend. He called Lena from the car. Everything's in motion, she said. The accounts are frozen under your name. Isabel can't touch anything. Good, Ethan said quietly. Make sure the firm knows I'll handle the transition personally. Lena hesitated. Are you sure you're ready for that? I've been ready since the day she thought I couldn't see her. The car moved through the city, tires hissing on wet streets. Every sound, the wipers, the passing traffic, the heartbeat of the rain, felt sharper, clearer. The world had never looked brighter to him. By the time he reached home, the sun was sinking behind the skyline, bleeding orange into deep indigo. Isabel was waiting near the window, hands clasped, face pale. He didn't need sight to know she'd been crying. He could hear the uneven rhythm of her breathing, the tiny breaks in her voice when she said, "Ethan, please, talk to me." He walked past her, placing his cane gently against the wall. "Talking is what we've been doing, Isabel," he said quietly. "Truth is what we've been avoiding." She moved closer. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was scared. Of losing you. Of losing everything." He turned his head slightly, listening to her fear more than her words. "You lost me the moment you decided to buy love with lies." Her tears fell harder. "You don't understand what it's like to be invisible beside someone like you." He smiled faintly, sadness flickering across his face. "I understand better than you think. I live in the dark every day. The difference is, I never tried to make someone else blind with me." The room went still. The weight of that truth landed like a stone dropped into water, soft at first, then echoing deep. He picked up his coat. "The lawyers will reach out tomorrow. You'll have time to pack whatever you need." She stepped forward, desperate. "And what about us?" Ethan paused by the door. The rain started again outside, whispering against the glass like the world exhaling. "There is no us," he said softly. "There's only what's left after the light returns." He opened the door and stepped into the hallway, the cool air wrapping around him like clarity itself. Behind him, Isabel's sobs filled the empty space, raw, human, too late. As the elevator descended, Ethan tilted his head upward. Somewhere above him, the penthouse still glowed with the faint light of evening. Once, that had been his prison. Now it was just another story ending where truth finally learned to speak. He whispered into the silence, as if to himself, "Light doesn't destroy shadows. It shows you what's hiding inside them." And with that, he walked out into the rain, unafraid, unbroken, and finally free. The morning after the storm felt strangely alive. The air outside Ethan's new cottage smelled of pine and damp earth, and the world hummed with quiet beginnings, birds calling from the eaves, wind stirring the leaves, and the soft crunch of gravel under his boots as he stepped out to greet the dawn. He couldn't see the light rising over the valley, but he could feel it, like a gentle pulse against his skin, warm and constant. It was the sound of the sun, the music of forgiveness. It had been 3 months since he left the city, 3 months since he walked away from everything he thought he needed, the company, the power, the empty apartment that once echoed with someone else's lies. Now his days began with the earth itself, the rhythm of footsteps on soil, the smell of hay, the chatter of the ranch hands who came to help build what he called the haven. A place for the blind, the forgotten, and the broken. Those who needed not just shelter, but the chance to see again in their own way. He'd turned his inheritance, once Isabel's obsession, into something pure, a legacy his father would have recognized, a vision he didn't need eyes to follow. As the morning stretched wider, Lena's car approached the dirt path. She stepped out, carrying a folder and her usual calm smile. "You've done it," she said softly, looking around. "This place feels alive." Ethan smiled. "It is. And so am I." She handed him the folder. "Your foundation paperwork is complete. The first group of residents arrives next week." He nodded slowly. Good. Let's make sure they never feel like charity. Just family. Lena hesitated before speaking again. Isabel called the office last week. She wanted to apologize, said she's moving overseas. Ethan's face remained still. Then I hope she finds her own light. He said it without bitterness, just calm understanding. Some stories, he had learned, didn't need revenge to end. They only needed closure. After Lena left, Ethan sat on the porch steps with a cup of coffee, listening to the wind moving through the open fields. Somewhere beyond the fence, a child laughed. A clear, bright sound that reminded him of something he'd once lost. Innocence without fear. He tilted his head toward the sound, smiling faintly. In that moment, everything returned to him. The deception, the heartbreak, the letter, the long nights wondering why love had turned so cold. But now, they didn't hurt anymore. They were lessons carved into the shape of peace. He whispered into the morning air, "You can take away sight, but not vision. You can break trust, but not the will to heal." The wind carried his words into the open fields, and as the first rays of sunlight warmed his face, he let the silence between heartbeats say the rest. There were no grand speeches left to make, no revenge left to chase. Only the quiet truth that life, even broken, could still be beautiful. The world around him seemed to hum with new meaning. He smiled again, not because he could see the sun, but because he could finally hear it. The sound of the sun. The sound of a man who had found his way home.